Welcome back to Key Safety Talks on YouTube. You know, your daily dose of safety knowledge. And today, we're diving into something that affects all of us. Whether you're the engineer making the next big thing or just,
Right.
you know, someone who uses products, which I think is all of us. It's product liability.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah.
The product breaks unexpectedly or it just doesn't quite work how it should. But how often do we stop and think about the companies that made these products? What's their responsibility? And what happens when things go really wrong?
That's a great question. And that's where things get really interesting. We've got some excerpts from Safety and Health for Engineers today to guide us. And it's fascinating stuff. We're going to uncover how these legal theories around product liability have developed. And we're going to dive into some real-life case studies and even explore how something like the Tylenol tampering case, you know, changed the way we package everyday
Well,
items.
that case was a turning point. It really brought the vulnerability of consumers to the forefront and forced a massive shift in how manufacturers thought about product safety.
Totally. It's like, who would have thought you'd need tamper-proof seals on over-the-counter medicine? What a wake-up call. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's step back and look at how this idea of product liability even evolved.
Okay, so picture this. It's the 1800s. You're buying a horse-drawn carriage, and the wheel falls off on your way home. Back then, the idea was caveat emptor, buyer beware. You were on your own.
So if you got hurt because of a faulty product, that was just tough luck.
Pretty much, the burden was entirely on the buyer to make sure the product was safe. But as you can imagine, this started to cause problems as products became more complex, more dangerous.
Yeah, a faulty carriage wheel is one thing. Imagine a steam engine exploding because of shoddy workmanship. That's a whole other level.
Exactly, and that's where privity of contract comes in. Initially, liability was limited to the direct parties in a transaction, the buyer and seller. So let's say you bought a faulty coffee pot from a shop and it exploded. The manufacturer might not be held responsible because you didn't buy it directly from them.
That doesn't seem fair. So if I'm understanding this right, even if a company makes a shoddy product, they could just escape responsibility because someone else sold it to you.
That was the initial thinking. But a landmark case in 1916, McPherson versus Buick Motor Company, really changed the game. A guy bought a Buick, and one of the wheels, it was made of wood, by the way, collapsed and caused an accident. The courts ruled that Buick, the manufacturer, was liable, even though the car was sold through a dealer.
Okay, that makes sense. You can't just pass the buck because there's a middleman, especially when we're talking about something potentially dangerous.
It was a huge shift. And from there, product liability law really started to develop. And today we have three main legal theories: negligence, warranty, and strict liability.
Okay, let's break those down, starting with negligence. What does that mean in the world of products?
Well, negligence means that the manufacturer didn't take reasonable care during the design or manufacturing, or even how they explain the product to the user. So think about using cheap materials when better ones are available, or skipping important safety tests,
Yeah.
or, writing instructions that are so confusing that they might as well be useless.
So it's not about a company like intentionally trying to hurt people. It's about them not doing enough to prevent the harm.
Exactly. In fact, there's a case in our source material about a machine with a poorly placed rotary switch.
Yeah.
This switch controlled whether the machine moved up or down, but the design made it so easy to trigger the wrong function. Someone got hurt. And even though the company didn't intend for that to happen, the design was a clear case of negligence.
Well, that sounds like a design nightmare. It just goes to show how one seemingly small detail can have huge consequences.
It definitely does. It underscores how crucial careful design and thorough testing are. It's about anticipating those problems and designing them out.
Okay. Next up, we've got warranty. Now, I know warranty usually involves, returning a broken product or something like that. But how does that fit into product liability?
So warranty has two sides: express and implied. An express warranty is a direct promise from the manufacturer. So if a car company guarantees their engine's going to last for 100,000 miles and it dies at 50,000, well, they've broken that promise.
So it's like a contract. They said would do this and it didn't.
Right. Now, implied warranty gets a little more abstract. It's not written out, but it's basically the law saying that any product should be fit for its normal purpose. So a coffee maker should make coffee. It shouldn't explode in the process, even if there's no written guarantee saying so.
Okay, that makes sense. So implied warranty is like the basic expectation that a product's going to do what it's supposed to do without causing harm.
Exactly. And there's also an implied warranty of fitness for a particular purpose. Let's say you need a ladder for some heavy-duty construction work. And the salesperson, knowing this, recommends a specific model. If that ladder breaks under normal use for that purpose, the seller could be held liable because their expertise led you to believe, or trust, that that ladder would be up to the task.
So it's about relying on the seller's knowledge to make sure the product is right for a specific job.
Right. But remember, both express and implied warranties can have limitations or disclaimers, so reading the fine print is always a good idea.
Got it. So we've got negligence, which is about the manufacturer's actions, warranty, which is about promises and reliance, and finally we have strict liability. What makes strict liability different?
So strict liability is where things get really serious for manufacturers. It basically says that if a product is defective and unreasonably dangerous, the company is liable for any harm that it causes, regardless of whether they were negligent or made any specific promises.
Wait, so even if they weren't careless and they didn't explicitly guarantee anything, they could still be held responsible?
Yep. Under strict liability, the focus shifts entirely to the product itself. It doesn't matter if the company did everything right during design and manufacturing. If that product is defective and dangerous, they're responsible for the consequences.
That sounds like a pretty high bar for companies to clear.
It is, and it's intentional. It protects consumers who may not have the technical knowledge to really understand how a product works or all the risks involved.
I mean, that makes sense. Most of us just assume that the product we buy are safe. We're not all engineers who can dissect the design and manufacturing process.
Lastly, strict liability really puts the onus on the manufacturer to ensure their products are safe before they even hit the market. It's a pretty powerful legal tool and encourages companies to prioritize safety above all else.
Okay, so we've covered these three pillars of product liability law: negligence, warranty, and strict liability. And each one looks at the issue from a different angle. But they all aim to hold manufacturers accountable for the safety of their products.
Right. And understanding these three theories is crucial, not just for consumers, but for engineers who are designing and manufacturing the products that we use every day.
Speaking of engineers, you mentioned earlier that our source material offers them some practical advice. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Absolutely. One of the key takeaways for engineers is the importance of risk analysis. This involves identifying potential hazards that are associated with a product and then evaluating how likely and how severe those hazards might be.
So it's like thinking through all the ways a product could be misused or what could go wrong, even if it seems unlikely.
Precisely. It's about considering all foreseeable uses and misuses of a product, even the ones that might seem a little ridiculous. The book actually uses this great example of a child reaching for something in a kitchen cabinet. To an adult, it's obvious that you shouldn't climb on cabinets, but an engineer needs to anticipate that a child might not understand that risk, so they might design that cabinet with much stronger hinges or maybe safety latches to prevent those accidents.
That's a great point. You can't just assume that everyone's going to use a product as intended.
Right. And alongside risk analysis, staying up to date on industry standards and best practices is key. There are often very specific guidelines and regulations for different types of products, covering, safety requirements and testing procedures. Engineers need to be aware of these and incorporate them into their designs.
It's like you can be the most creative, innovative engineer in the world, but if your product doesn't meet those safety standards, it's kind of a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. And adhering to those standards doesn't just protect people. It also provides a legal defense for engineers if something does go wrong. It shows that they were following recognized best practices.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So risk analysis, considering a wide range of user behaviors and following those industry standards, those are all key ingredients in the recipe for safe and responsible product design.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another crucial element: warnings. Even the best designed product is going to have some inherent risks.
You can design the sharpest, most ergonomic knife in the world, but there's still a chance that someone could cut themselves if they're not careful.
Exactly. And that's where warnings come in. They inform those users about the potential hazards and hopefully help them use that product safely.
Okay, let's talk warnings. We've all seen those ridiculously long warning labels. They seem to cover every imaginable scenario. Some of them are hilarious, like, do not use hair dryers while sleeping. Come on.
Yeah.
But seriously, how do you create a warning that's effective without being totally overwhelming?
You hit the nail on the head. It's a balancing act. Our source material actually has a really handy table that outlines the characteristics of effective warnings.
Oh, that sounds useful. What are some of the key takeaways?
Well, first and foremost, a warning needs to be clear and easy to understand. It should avoid any jargon, use simple language, and be written at a level that the intended user can grasp.
So no fancy technical terms, no confusing legal language.
Exactly. And then next is comprehensibility. A warning needs to explain the hazard, the potential consequences of ignoring it, and how to avoid the hazard in the first place. It's not enough to just say, danger hot. You need to explain what could happen if you touch it, and how to avoid getting burned.
Right. It's all about giving people the information they need to make those safe choices.
Another key aspect is visibility. The warning needs to be prominently displayed, easy to spot. It should be placed where users are likely to see it, before they even interact with the product. And of course, it needs to be durable. If it's on a power tool that's used outdoors, it shouldn't fade away after a few weeks in the sun.
Durability is key. No one's going to heed a warning they can't even read.
Exactly. Then there's the tricky part, getting people to actually change their behavior. A good warning should motivate users to actually take precautions.
I imagine that's a tough one to crack. People can be stubborn, especially if they think they know better.
It is a challenge, but there are some techniques that can help. Strong visuals, like graphic symbols, can really grab attention, and integrating warnings into the product's design itself can be even more effective. Think about a saw with a safety guard that physically prevents you from getting too close to the blade. That's a built-in warning that's pretty hard to ignore.
That's a great example. It's like, instead of just telling people to be careful, you're making it physically harder for them to make a dangerous mistake.
Precisely. And finally, consistency is crucial. Warnings should be consistent across similar products and follow industry standards to avoid any confusion. If one brand of chainsaw warns you to wear eye protection, another brand shouldn't be saying something different.
It's all about making safety intuitive and predictable.
Exactly. Consistent warnings just make it easier for people to understand and follow those safety precautions, no matter what product they're using.
Okay, so we've covered the basics of product liability law, negligence, warranty, strict liability. And we talked about the importance of risk analysis and effective warnings. But what happens when things actually go wrong and someone decides to sue?
That's when we enter the world of the product liability lawsuit. It's a complex process, but understanding those basic steps can be really helpful for everyone, not just lawyers.
Okay, let's break it down. What typically happens when someone decides to file a product liability lawsuit?
Well, the first step is filing a complaint, and this is a formal document that outlines the plaintiff's allegations against the defendant, usually the manufacturer, and it describes the product, the defect, the injury caused, and the legal theories under which the plaintiff is suing.
So it's like laying out the whole story. This is what happened, this is how I was hurt, and this is why I think this company is responsible.
Exactly. Then comes discovery. And this is where things can get really interesting. This is the fact-finding phase, where both sides exchange information that's relevant to the case. They can request documents, take depositions, interview witnesses, and even bring in expert witnesses to give their professional opinions.
Expert witnesses. This is where engineers often come into the picture, right?
Absolutely. Engineers play a vital role in these cases. They can analyze the design and manufacturing process, identify potential defects, and explain all that really technical stuff to a jury that might not have any background in engineering.
So they're kind of like translators between the technical world and the legal world.
You could say that. They help the court understand the technical aspects of the case and really offer their expert opinion on whether the product was actually defective and if that defect caused the plaintiff's injuries.
That's a big responsibility.
It is. It's crucial. And after discovery, if the case hasn't been settled, it moves to pre-trial, where lawyers file motions and argue before the judge to really narrow down the issues that'll be presented at the actual trial.
So it's like the warm-up act before the main event.
You could say that. And it's during this phase that we often see the concept of deep pockets come into play.
Deep pockets, what does that mean?
So deep pockets refers to the fact that defendants with more financial resources are often seen as more attractive targets for lawsuits. It's a cynical reality. But sometimes the financial considerations can influence how a case is pursued or defended.
So it's not just about whether a company did something wrong. It's also about whether they have the money to pay if they lose.
Unfortunately, yes. It's a very complex issue with ethical implications. But it's a reality of the legal system. And if a case isn't dismissed or settled during pretrial, then it goes to trial.
And that's where the jury decides.
Right. Both sides present their evidence and their arguments, and the jury decides if the defendant is liable and how much they have to pay in damages to the plaintiff.
So it's a high-stakes process for everyone involved.
It is, and it's also important to remember that product liability laws are different around the world. For example, the European Union has a strict product liability directive. It holds manufacturers liable for defective products. regardless of whether they were negligent.
So even if the manufacturer wasn't careless, they can still be held responsible in the EU.
Exactly. It just shows how different regions approach consumer protection. The EU puts a lot of emphasis on holding those manufacturers accountable for product safety, regardless of intent.
That's fascinating. It really highlights how product liability is this global issue, and companies need to be aware of those different legal standards
Eh?
in different markets.
Absolutely. And as more products are made and sold globally, this international perspective is becoming increasingly important.
Okay, so we've walked through this entire lawsuit process, from the initial complaint to the final verdict. It's a journey with a lot of twists and turns, and it really shows just how much is at stake. When it comes to product safety,
Absolutely. And remember, engineers play a crucial role in this entire process. They're not just designing products, they're designing safety into those products. And their expertise can be vital in those legal proceedings.
right, they're at the forefront of both preventing harm and understanding how and why things go wrong. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part
Yeah.
of our look at product liability. We talk about how the concept evolved, those three key legal theories, and even that whole lawsuit process.
We've only just scratched the surface in the next part. We'll dive even deeper into those different types of product defects. Look at some real-world examples and explore how engineers can minimize those risks and ensure the safety of the products that they create.
Stay tuned for that. We'll be right back after a quick message from our sponsor.
Welcome back to Key Safety Talks.
So before the break, we were really exploring that legal side of product liability from those three big theories: negligence, warranty, and strict liability. That whole, roller coaster of a lawsuit.
Yeah, and we talked about how important engineers are in keeping things safe,
Yeah.
using risk analysis, and crafting those all-important warnings that hopefully people actually read.
Right. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Product defects. What exactly does it mean for a product to be defective?
Well, when we talk about defects, we're really talking about three main categories: design defects, manufacturing defects, and then those pesky defects in the instructions or warnings.
Okay, so let's unpack those. Starting with design defects. What makes a product's design inherently dangerous?
A design defect is like a flaw. It's baked right into the blueprint. Imagine a baby crib with slats spaced too far apart. Even if it's made with the best wood and perfect craftsmanship, that design is fundamentally unsafe. A baby could slip through and get trapped. Or worse.
Oh, that's terrifying. So it's not about one bad crib, it's the entire design itself that's the hazard.
Exactly. Think about a power tool with a safety guard that comes loose way too easily, even if that tool itself is well made. That design flaw puts users at risk of, coming in contact with a blade or other moving parts.
So it comes down to anticipating those risks and designing them out from the start.
Right. And a big concept in these design defect cases is foreseeability. Could a reasonable manufacturer have foreseen the danger posed by their design?
So it's not about predicting every single crazy thing that someone might do with a product, but considering how a normal person might use it or misuse it and designing accordingly.
Exactly. And this kind of leads us to our second type of defect: manufacturing defects. These aren't about the overall design, but rather something going wrong during production.
So the blueprint is good, but someone messed up along the way.
You got it. Think about a batch of cookies that gets contaminated at the factory, or a car assembly line, where a robot doesn't tighten a bolt properly, leading to a potential mechanical failure down the road. Those are manufacturing defects. They affect only some or even just one of the products made.
Okay, that makes sense. So unlike design defects, which affect that whole product line, manufacturing defects are more like isolated incidents.
Exactly. And finding those often involves, really rigorous quality control inspections, testing, and tracing the problem back to its source to prevent it from happening again.
Right. Okay, so we've got design flaws and manufacturing hiccups. What about that third category? Defects in the instructions and warnings.
Ah, yes. These are often overlooked, but they can be just as dangerous as those other two. You could have a perfectly designed, perfectly manufactured product, but if the instructions are terrible or the warnings are inadequate, it's a recipe for trouble.
It's like giving someone a super-powered chainsaw without explaining how to use it safely.
Exactly. Imagine a medication that's safe when used correctly, but has some nasty side effects. If you take too much or mix it with the wrong things, if the instructions fail to warn about those risks, that's a big problem.
So it's not enough to just slap a generic warning label on something. The warnings need to be specific, clear, and tailored to that particular product and its potential dangers.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This is where all those characteristics of effective warnings that we talked about earlier come into play. making sure they're readable, understandable, visible, durable, all that good stuff.
Yeah, it makes you realize that those warning labels aren't just legal mumbo-jumbo. They could actually save someone from a nasty accident. Or worse.
Absolutely. And remember, these three types of defects can all be interconnected. A design flaw might make a product more prone to those manufacturing errors and poor warnings, can amplify the risks posed by either design or manufacturing problems.
So it's like this whole web of factors that determine whether a product is safe or a ticking time bomb.
It's a complex puzzle, and that's why engineers need a really solid understanding of these product liability principles. They need to prioritize safety at every step, from those initial design sketches to that final product rolling off the assembly line.
It's not just about building cool new gadgets. It's about building things that are both innovative and safe for the people who will use them.
Right. And that brings us to a bit of a sobering reality. All of these legal theories and types of defects, they exist because things go wrong in the real world, sometimes catastrophically wrong.
Oh, absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in all the technical details. But we can't forget that product liability is about real people getting hurt, sometimes with life-altering consequences.
Exactly. And there are some historical examples that are just heartbreaking and serve as stark reminders of why product safety is so crucial. The Ford Pinto case from the 1970s is a prime example. The Pinto had this design flaw that made its gas tank prone to rupturing and rear-end collisions, leading to fires and, tragically, fatalities.
Actually, that case was huge. It really shook the public's trust in the auto industry and kind of forced this major reckoning with safety standards.
It did, and even more recently, we had those Boeing 737MX crashes. These were caused by a combination of design flaws and inadequate pilot training. Again, we saw tragic loss of life and a major blow to the reputation of a company that was once considered, a leader in aviation safety.
These cases are so tragic. It shows how even companies with enormous resources and supposedly rigorous safety procedures can still make mistakes. Mistakes that have devastating consequences.
It's a humbling reminder that product safety is this ongoing challenge, and everyone involved, engineers, manufacturers, regulators, needs to be constantly vigilant.
It's a shared responsibility
Right.
to protect people from harm. We can't just assume that because a product is on the market, that it's automatically safe.
Right, and this is where engineers really come into their own. They have the power to design safety into products from the very beginning, minimizing those risks and potentially saving lives.
They're like the guardians of product safety, using their skills and knowledge to protect the public from harm.
Exactly, and that's what we'll focus on. In the final part of our discussion, exploring the practical strategies engineers can use to minimize those liability risks and create products that are not just innovative, but safe for everyone.
Stay with us. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Key Safety Talks.
So we spent the last two segments, really delving into this legal maze of product liability and confronting some of those, harsh realities of product defects.
Yeah, we've seen how things can go wrong, sometimes tragically so, and discussed that heavy responsibility that falls on manufacturers to make safe products.
Right. So now, let's shift our focus to those engineers who are really on the front lines of product development. What practical strategies can they use to minimize those risks and create products that are not just innovative, but truly safe for everyone?
That's what we're here to unpack today. We want to give our engineer listeners the knowledge and the tools they need to make a real difference in product safety. So where do they even begin?
Well, as we've discussed, a really solid understanding of that legal and ethical landscape is crucial. Engineers need to be aware of those potential consequences, of design flaws, manufacturing errors, and those all-important warnings.
So it's not just about technical skills, it's also about having that strong ethical compass and knowing those legal ins and outs.
Absolutely. Engineers aren't just building things, they're building things that will be used by real people.
Yeah.
And their decisions, big or small, can have a huge impact on people's lives.
Yeah, that's a powerful reminder of the weight of their responsibility. Okay, so awareness is the foundation. What are some specific strategies they can use to build on that?
One of the most powerful tools in an engineer's arsenal is risk analysis, and it's about systematically identifying those potential hazards, figuring out how likely they are to occur, and how severe the consequences might be.
So it's like thinking through every possible what-if scenario, no matter how unlikely it might seem.
Exactly. And then it's about implementing measures to reduce those risks to an acceptable level. It's about being proactive, not reactive, addressing those safety concerns during the design phase, rather than scrambling to fix them after a problem has already occurred.
That makes sense.
Sure.
It's much easier to change a design on paper than to recall thousands of faulty products.
Precisely. And there are some really helpful tools for conducting that risk analysis. One of the most widely used is failure modes and effects analysis, or FMEA.
That sounds intense. What is FMEA exactly?
It's a very structured approach to brainstorming all the ways a product could potentially fail. So you think about what might cause the failure, what the consequences would be, and how you can prevent or minimize the risk of that failure happening.
So it's like systematically playing devil's advocate with your own design.
Exactly. You're trying to anticipate every possible failure point
Yeah.
and find those solutions before they become real-world problems.
That sounds incredibly valuable. What else can engineers do to ensure they're designing for safety?
Well, another crucial aspect is designing for a wide range of user behaviors. You can't just assume that everyone will use a product exactly as intended. People make mistakes, they get distracted, they try to use things in ways that you never anticipated.
Right, like using a screwdriver to open a paint can when you can't find the proper opener.
Exactly. Engineers need to consider those variations in human behavior and design accordingly. For example, a power tool might have a safety feature that prevents it from operating unless the user is gripping it correctly.
So it's about designing for the real world with all its quirks and imperfections.
Right. And it's not just about preventing misuse, it's also about designing for accessibility. What about users with disabilities or those who might not be as strong or dexterous?
That's an important consideration. A product that's safe for one person might not be safe for another.
Exactly. Inclusive design is a key part of safety. And in addition to that risk analysis and designing for that range of user behaviors, following industry standards and best practices is essential.
So even if an engineer comes up with a brilliant new design, it still needs to meet those established safety guidelines.
Absolutely. Adhering to those standards is not just good practice. It can also protect engineers in the event of a lawsuit. It shows that they were following recognized industry procedures and taking safety seriously.
It's like having a safety net for both the users of the product and the engineer who designed it.
Right. And remember, those standards are constantly evolving as technology advances. And, our understanding of safety improves.
That makes sense. What was considered safe 10 years ago might not meet today's standards.
Exactly. Which brings me to my final piece of advice for engineers. Never stop learning. Technology is always moving forward, new materials are being developed, and safety research is constantly uncovering new insights.
So it's a commitment to lifelong learning. Engineers need to stay on top of those advancements to make sure their designs are as safe as possible.
Exactly. It's about attending conferences, reading industry publications, taking courses, and always being curious about new ways to improve their skills and knowledge.
It's about being a lifelong student of safety.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
The world of product design is constantly evolving, and engineers have a duty to evolve along with it.
That's a great point. And it's not just about staying ahead of the curve. It's about making sure the products we use every day are as safe as they can possibly be.
Well said. It's about understanding that every design decision, every material choice, every line of code has the potential to impact people's lives.
And ultimately, that's what product liability is all about, protecting consumers and ensuring that the things we rely on every day are safe, reliable, and won't cause harm.
It's about recognizing that with innovation comes responsibility. And engineers, with their unique skills and knowledge, have the power to make a real difference in the world.
It's a powerful message. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of product liability. We hope you gained some valuable insights today, whether you're an engineer, a consumer, or just someone who's curious about how the things we use every day are made.
And remember, safety is a shared responsibility. We all have a role to play in creating a world where products are not just innovative and exciting, but also safe for everyone.
That's right. Thanks for listening to Key Safety Talks, and be sure to check back tomorrow for another insightful episode. Until then, stay safe out there.